Hello everyone and welcome to the start of the Norway chess. Before the actual classical event, we're gonna have a Blitz tournament. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave with a very nice game in round 2 where things go crazy already at the start of the game, basically on move 4 or okay, maybe move 5. You'll see what I mean by this. So let's dive straight into it and enjoy it. Remember, it's a Blitz game, so not a lot of time to think about the moves, and that's exactly why the lines get this insane. So Magnus has the white pieces and he opens with c4. He goes for the English opening. We have e5, g3, c6. And now pawn to d4. Striking in the center, Maxime advances his pawn to e4, and Magnus advances his pawn to d5. And usually bishop to b4 check is the move you play here. However, Maxime plays knight to f6, and he now invites Magnus to push this pawn all the way to d6 and pretty much prevent Maxime from developing his dark square bishop. And this is exactly what Magnus does. He pushes d6, and it is now already as of move 5 that we have a completely new game. No wonder, as who would allow such a thing? Well, Maxime would, as he wants to get some very active play, even at the cost of some material. So here, g6 right away. He wants to fianchetto the bishop, castle his king to safety, and, well, force Magnus to waste some time grabbing the pawn on e4, and hopefully get some sort of an attack going. So knight to c3, bishop to g7, and the bishop to g2. And now, okay, the e4 pawn is hanging. Maybe Maxime could defend it with queen to a5, pinning the knight, but he doesn't care about the pawn. He just castles. He says, you go after the pawn, your king is still on e1, you still have to move the knight and then castle, so hopefully I'm gonna get some sort of an attack here. So Magnus captures the pawn, we have knight captures on f3, bishop captures, and rook to e8, and already the rook is in the attack. It comes into the game with tempo, so bishop has to move, bishop back to g2, and queen to a5 with check. We have bishop to d2 and queen c5. Now we're threatening to capture this pawn, this pawn, this pawn, and the Magnus needs to do something about this. So he plays bishop to c3. Now the b2 and the d6 pawn are defended, and Maxime captures on c3, doubling Carlsen's c3 c pawn, captures, and queen captures on c4. Now threatening queen captures on c3. So Magnus defends it, and now comes pawn to b6. Magnus now strikes with h4. He wants to play h5 and open up the h file. And now pawn to h5. Maxime, of course, prevents this, and here comes a really awesome moment in the game. Magnus plays knight to h3. He wants to well, he has some attacking ideas of maybe just moving the king, maybe bring the queen to h6, put the knight on g5, quickly checkmate the black king, but he completely blunders the game away. So feel free to pause the video here and find the winning idea for Maxime while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on realizing that this is just happening. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook captures on e2 with check, of course, and now you don't have a good move. You can't capture with the king, you have to capture with the queen. Now queen captures on c3 with check, now the rook falls, and you can defend a little bit. Let's say queen e5 check, queen e2, we happily trade queens, and that's it. Bishop a6 check, we're up 2 pawns with black. This is easily winning for Maxime. But Maxime, as usual, doesn't expect Magnus to make such a big blunder, and he just continues developing. Knight to a6. Magnus quickly castles to safety, and now knight to c5. We have rook f to e1, and bishop to a6 now, putting a lot of pressure here on this e2 pawn. So bishop f3, defending it, and now knight to e4, attacking the queen. And now the question is, do you bring the queen to h6? And even though, of course, it looks like a great move, after this move, we can't really do anything about knight to g5. Of course, we want to capture and play knight g5, but Maxime would just go back, and okay, you can get your knight to g5, but nothing is happening really. The black knight on f6 controls the h7 square, so this is nothing. Basically, you've just trapped your queen on h6 for no good reason. So here, Magnus plays bishop captures on e4 instead. Now the knight will be unable to help out with the defense of the mating attack. attack. Rook captures on e4 and queen to h6. Now the idea is, of course, knight g5, queen h7, queen f7. Okay, we can't play queen f7, the queen covers this, but it's gonna be a very, very strong attack. So rook e5, we simply cannot allow that knight to have the g5 square, even at the price of some materials. So knight g5 and rook captures on g5. Maxime has to give up the exchange. Now h captures on g5 would be pointless. You would just trap your queen on h6. So queen captures on g5 was played. Rook to e8, and now we have queen back to d2. Just adding a defender to the e2 pawn, and you don't really... I mean, you could trade, for example, rook captures on e2, but that's really nothing. Rook captures, queen captures, bishop captures, and the resulting endgame is, of course, winning. For white, it's a bishop against a rook. So instead, we have c5. We have f3 by Magnus, preparing e4, and the bishop to b7. We have king to f2, rook to e6, and now pawn to a4. We have pawn to not pawn to a5, bishop to c6 now, and Magnus advances the pawn to a5. We have b5 and now a6, grabbing more space on the queen side. Rook to e5, and now pawn to e4. And now, how can Magnus make some progress here? It's not going to be easy. Maxime created a blockade in the center, and now he wants to play b4 and create a passed b pawn. So here we have queen to e6, bringing the queen back, rook 8 to d1, and now king to g7. We have queen to f4 by Magnus, and f6 now. We have g4 and now g5, chasing away the queen. Queen back to g3. You could capture here. It seems like a nice idea, but it's a blitz game. You don't have all that much time on the clock, but it does make sense to open up the king like this, play king to h2, queen h2, attack the pawn, and once the position gets blockaded, there's this wonderful rook to d5 idea, but this is very, very difficult to find. Point is that if captures, that's... very tricky. Rook captures on e1, and now comes d captures on e6. So you can't really do that. And what can you do? You have to move the queen or something, but it's not great. If you move the queen, then we just play queen captures on e5 with check. We end up a whole rook, so everything is completely winning here. But it's a blitz game, so queen back to g3, h captures on g4. We have h captures on g5, rook captures on g5, and now f4, grabbing more space here, attacking the rook. Rook to h5, and now f5, attacking the queen. And now queen b3 is actually very, very resourceful for black, but it's getting the queen so far away from the defense of your own king, it just looks silly. But if queen captures on g4 check, rook g5, and you're okay. Once the queen moves, you deliver a check here, and a lot of squares are controlled by black here. If rook to d2, queen captures on c3, it's still a game. However, queen to f7 was played here. It seems like it's even better, as it adds more protection to the rook, and Maxime wants to hide his king over to the queen side, but this doesn't work. Queen captures on g4 with check, king to f8, and now feel free to pause the video and try and see if you have the positional sense of a Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this move. It's not an easy move to find, but if you've studied the position, then you've no doubt found it, and that is rook to h1. Rook to g1 is strong, rook to h1 is just crushing. There is no defense against rook to h1. Magnus plays this, and now it's very, very difficult. The problem is your rook here is attacked. If you trade rook captures, how do you defend against rook h8? The pawn covers the e7 square, so the king doesn't really have any squares. And if queen g7 offering a queen trade, we just play queen h4. Now rook g1 is coming, and there's no defense against that. So instead, Maxime tried queen to a2 with check, but now Magnus just goes back, queen to e2. And now you have to trade queens because the rook is hanging. So queen captures with check, king captures, rook captures, and bishop captures on e4, attacking the rook. And Maxime is up a pawn, but still it's a rook against the bishop, and Magnus immediately goes after this a7 pawn that's on a dark square, so it's gonna be very easy to capture it. King f7. Now first king e3, attacking the bishop. If the bishop captures here, it doesn't really matter. So Maxime brings the bishop back. We have rook to c8, now going after the c7 square. If you captured here, then rook a8 immediately works because the bishop no longer has control over the a8 square. So b4, Maxime now creates a pass b pawn, c captures, and now rook to c7. There is no defending this. b3, king to d2, we have to stop the pass b pawn, bishop to e4 now. And here would be a perfect moment to mess up the entire game for Magnus if he were to capture on a7, because then b2 wins. The pawn covers c1, bishop covers c2, so the king cannot get near the pawn, and of course you don't have rook b7 as the bishop covers that as well, so that would be pretty terrible. But Magnus plays rook captures on d7 with check, and now it doesn't matter what black plays, because next move we just bring the king closer, and the pawn will never reach the b2 dark square. But here king to e8 was played, so Magnus just played rook to e8, so e7 check, and it was in this position on move 50 that Maxime Vachier-Lagrave resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once the king moves, we're just gonna capture the bishop, and now the bishop no longer helps out with the control of anything, and also you can just bring the rook to b4, so it's very easy to stop the pass pawn. So yeah, very nicely done. Congratulations to Magnus on this very nice game, but also to Maxime on making things extremely interesting and always, you know, bringing the best for the chess world. It's never boring when Maxime plays, especially. I mean, he brings some crazy lines even in classical and rapid, but in Blitz, he always delivers. So yeah, this was a very fine idea, knight to f6 by Maxime, trying to get Magnus to overextend and then sort of make a counterattack with Carlsen's king still being stuck in the center, but it just didn't work out. It almost did after Magnus played this knight to h3, if only Maxime spotted rook captures on e2, but unfortunately for Maxime that didn't happen. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you enjoyed it. Always expect the unexpected. Even if your opponent is an extremely strong player, he can always make a move that blunders the game completely. So you know, always trust yourself and check everything your opponent does. I would like to thank first Elden Lord, Nagarjuna Ponugoti, congrats Harry 3 grads, Andre Theron, and Alexander John Huar for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Norway chess, most likely until it ends. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.